The first buzz of my phone barely registered in my sleep, a faint vibration against the wooden nightstand. The second stirred me a little more. But the third, short, sharp, insistent, dragged me into full consciousness. I groaned, reaching for it blindly, but my fingers brushed against something smooth and cold instead. Carol's phone. That was strange. Carol never left her phone unattended, not even when she went to the bathroom. It was a habit I once found endearing, proof of her attachment to social media or whatever gossip she was following. But now, with my own phone still buzzing, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. I unlocked the screen. 3 messages from an unknown number. Check her phone. She's lying to you. She's not alone right now. The unease darkened into something heavier. I turned my head, reaching out to Carol's side of the bed. Empty. The sheets were still faintly warm. A chill ran down my spine. The house was silent, but not the peaceful kind. It was a charged, waiting stillness. My eyes flicked to the closed bedroom door, the hallway beyond it, the stairs. And then, faintly, a sound. Not the usual creaks of the house settling. Not the distant hum of the fridge downstairs. Something softer. Something unmistakable. A low voice. A whisper. A giggle. Carol's giggle. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. Every muscle in my body tensed. Instincts flaring like an animal sensing a predator nearby. I was awake now. Completely, terrifyingly awake. Moving carefully, I slid out of bed, my phone still clutched in my hand. Each step deliberate. Measured. I wasn't even sure what I was doing, what I was expecting to find. But I kept going. Halfway down the stairs, I paused. The living room light was off, but the faint glow of a phone screen cast shadows over 2 figures. Carol, and a man, sitting too close. My vision tunneled. The air around me warped. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, but reality refused to make sense. Carol leaned into him, her face inches from his. Their hands touched. An intimate, stolen moment. In my house. Rage ignited, instant and consuming, a wildfire coursing through my veins. My breath came fast and sharp, but I forced myself to stay silent. If they heard me now, if they looked up? No, not yet. I tightened my grip on the railing. Just as I was about to move, the front door creaked open. A tiny gasp. A sharp inhale. Our daughter stood there, frozen. Her wide eyes flicked between me, her mother, and the stranger on our couch. She didn't fully understand. But she knew. She knew something was wrong. Carol jolted upright. The man snapped his head around. And in that split second, everything shattered. Carol shot up so fast, she nearly tripped over the coffee table. The man beside her, Kenneth, I realized now, froze like a deer caught in headlights. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my daughter. Emily stood in the doorway, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. She wasn't supposed to be home yet. Her sleepover at a friend's house should have lasted until morning. But something had brought her back early. Maybe forgotten pajamas, maybe a bad dream. And instead of the warmth of home, she walked into this. Her little face twisted in confusion, then fear. Daddy? Carol finally turned, spotting Emily for the first time. And in that instant, I saw it. The moment she realized just how bad this was. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Kenneth moved first. Like a coward, he shot up from the couch, shoving his phone into his pocket and practically sprinting for the door. He muttered something under his breath, an apology, an excuse. I didn't care. My focus was on Carol. I took a step forward. Explain. My voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before an explosion. Carol's mouth opened and closed, her brain scrambling for a lie, an excuse. Anything to make this something other than what it so obviously was. But she knew. There was no coming back from this. Not with Emily here. It's not, she started, but I cut her off. Don't. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Don't. Emily took a step back, looking between us, her little hands trembling. And that broke me. My daughter. My baby. She wasn't supposed to see this. She wasn't supposed to be part of this. Carol's eyes flickered toward her. Maybe she thought of some pathetic motherly act, some way to soften the blow. But it was too late. Emily had seen everything. Carol turned back to me, panic flashing in her eyes. And then, so predictably, so Carol, she went on the attack. You're overreacting, she snapped, arms crossing over her chest like she was the one who had been wronged. It's not what it looks like. I laughed. A short, bitter sound. Oh, really? Then what was it, Carol? A Bible study? A business meeting? She scowled. Lower your voice. Emily doesn't need to see you act like this. Like this. Like I was the problem. Emily let out a tiny, choked sob. I looked at her again, really looked at her. The way her small hands gripped the strap of her backpack. The way her lip trembled. The way her eyes, her mother's eyes, filled with tears. Carol had already taken so much from me. But this? She was taking her. I exhaled sharply, forcing my voice steady. Emily, baby, I said, crouching down. Go upstairs, okay? I'll come talk to you in a minute. She hesitated, glancing at her mother. Carol forced a smile, like she thought she could smooth this over. Like she wasn't standing in the middle of the most unforgivable betrayal of our lives. Go on, sweetheart, she cooed. Daddy's just upset. I bit back the fury rising in my throat. Emily nodded hesitantly, then turned and ran up the stairs. The second her door shut, I turned back to Carol. Now, I said, my voice deadly calm. Tell me the truth, or I swear to God, you will regret every second of this. Carol didn't blink, didn't hesitate. Instead, she smirked. And then she said the words that would seal her fate. Well, since you're so curious, she drawled, I was actually thinking of asking for an open marriage. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, the nervous laugh, the backpedal, anything to turn this into some sick, twisted joke. But Carol just stood there, arms crossed, chin tilted up, looking at me like I was the one who had lost my mind. An open marriage. I repeated the words, testing how they felt in my mouth. They didn't belong there. Carol rolled her eyes. Don't act so shocked. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You were sneaking around with another man in our home. Our daughter walked in on it. And instead of apologizing, you're suggesting an open marriage? Carol sighed, exasperated, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Jesus, calm down. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Something inside me snapped. You think this isn't a big deal? My voice shook with fury. You think Emily walking in on you with some guy isn't a big deal? You think breaking our vows, lying to my face, disrespecting our family, none of that is a big deal? She threw up her hands. God, you're so dramatic. I was going to talk to you about it eventually, but you're so uptight. I knew you'd react like this. My pulse thundered in my ears. The walls seemed to close in, warping around me. My wife, stood in front of me, caught red-handed, and somehow, I was the unreasonable one. How long? I forced the words out. How long have you been seeing him? Carol hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. A broken laugh escaped me. So that's a yes, then. You've been screwing around. How long, Carol? She sighed, as if this was nothing more than an inconvenience. A few months. A few months. Every late night. Every girl's night. Every unexplained errand. Every time she left her phone face down. It all fell into place. I let out a breathless chuckle, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. Carol shrugged. As if it was nothing. It's not that big of a deal, she said. It's just variety, that's all. I love you, but I don't want to be stuck in the same boring routine for the rest of my life. I thought maybe if we opened things up, it would actually help us. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I ran a hand through my hair, struggling to hold myself together. And let me guess, I said bitterly. You already ran this by Kenneth? Carol's silence told me everything I needed to know. Of course. I let out a humorless laugh. So you've had your fun, made your decision, and now you just expect me to go along with it? She smirked. That same infuriating smirk. That glint in her eye, like she had already won. You should think about it, she said. It could be good for us. I breathed deeply, forcing myself to stay calm. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make her feel even a fraction of what I felt. But then an idea formed, dark, deliberate, perfect. Carol wanted an open marriage? Fine, let's have an open marriage. And I knew exactly where to start. Carol leaned back, arms crossed, waiting for me to explode, to storm out, to break down. She thought she had me backed into a corner, thought I'd beg or plead. She didn't know me as well as she thought. I took a slow breath, locked eyes with her, and smiled. You know what? I said, deliberate and measured. You're right. Carol's head tilted. She wasn't expecting that. Wait, what? I nodded, letting the words sink in. You're absolutely right. We should open the marriage. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, but she masked it quickly. I mean, yeah, she said, trying to sound smug. I knew you'd come around. Oh, Carol. She thought she won. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I put my plan into motion. I already knew where to begin. If Carol wanted to turn our marriage into a joke, I'd make sure the punchline hit her the hardest. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Sharon, Kenneth's wife. We had only met a couple of times at company events. She was quiet, polite, the kind of woman no one would expect to be caught in the middle of something like this. And yet, here we were. I hit call. She answered on the second ring. Hello? Hey, Sharon, I said, keeping my voice even. It's Stephen, Carol's husband. A pause. Then, cautiously, oh hi. I could hear the suspicion in her voice. She knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the details. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. I got straight to the point. I need to talk to you about Kenneth and Carol. Silence. Then, a shaky breath. What did they do? 10 minutes later, we sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. Two strangers, bound by the same betrayal. I laid everything out. Carol's late nights, the secret of texts, the way she smirked when she admitted to it. Sharon sat there, listening in silence, gripping her coffee cup so tightly I thought it might crack. When I finished, she let out a slow, shaky breath, her eyes glassy. I knew something was off. She whispered, "He's been different, distant." I didn't want to believe it. I nodded. "Yeah, same." She looked up at me then, something shifting in her expression, sharp, calculating. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I leaned back in my chair, choosing my words carefully. "Carol thinks she's in control," I said. "Thinks she's the one calling the shots. But she made a mistake." Sharon tilted her head. "What mistake?" I smiled. "She underestimated me." A slow smirk curved Sharon's lips. "Then let's make them regret it." That night, Carol came home late, completely unaware that the ground beneath her was already crumbling. She tossed her purse onto the counter, stretched like she'd had a long day, then turned to me with that smug little look. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" she purred, stepping closer. "About us. About how good this could be for us." I fought the urge to laugh in her face. Instead, I smiled. "Yeah," I said smoothly. "I've been thinking about it a lot." Carol grinned like she had already won, like she had cracked me open and pulled me to her side. She had no idea. I let her talk that night, let her spin her ridiculous justifications about freedom and excitement. I nodded along, pretending to listen, pretending to agree. I played my role perfectly. And the next night, I invited Sharon over. Carol was in the living room when the doorbell rang, scrolling through her phone, probably texting Kenneth. She barely glanced up as I went to answer the door. But when she saw who was standing there, she froze. Sharon stepped inside with effortless poise. I had to give her credit. She played her part flawlessly. She looked like a woman completely unbothered, as if she weren't standing face to face with the woman who had been sleeping with her husband. Carol blinked, confusion flickering across her face. What's she doing here?" I closed the door behind Sharon and smiled. "You wanted an open marriage," I said casually. "So I figured, why not start with Kenneth's wife?" Carol went rigid. Sharon barely concealed a smirk. Carol's mouth opened, then closed, her brain scrambling to catch up. "Wait, you what?" I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "What? You get to sleep with Kenneth, but I can't spend time with his wife?" Her face turned an ugly shade of red. That's not the same thing." Sharon finally spoke, her voice smooth as silk. "Why not?" she asked, tilting her head. "I mean, since we're all so open now." Carol's eyes snapped to her, narrowing. "You knew?" Sharon didn't even flinch. "I do now." Silence. Thick. Unbearable. Carol looked at me, then at Sharon, then back at me. Her nostrils flared. Her jaw clenched. And then she laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was sharp, bitter, mocking. "You think this bothers me?" she scoffed, folding her arms. "Go ahead. Be my guest. If you think you can handle an open marriage, let's see how you like it." She was daring me, testing me. She had no idea what she had just started. Carol had no idea that I had already won. She was about to lose everything. She thought she was calling my bluff, convinced I would back down, that I wasn't man enough to follow through. For years, she believed she was the smartest person in the room, the one pulling all the strings. But this time, she had no clue what was coming. Sharon and I sat comfortably on the couch as Carol paced the living room, arms crossed, her face twisted in frustration. She was trying to act indifferent, like this was all some harmless game, but the tight grip on her phone told another story. She was waiting for Kenneth to respond, probably wondering if he knew. He did. I made sure of it. Finally, Carol stopped in front of us, forcing a smirk. "So, what's the plan here, Stephen?" she asked, voice laced with mockery. "You and Sharon going to play house while I do my own thing? Is that what this is?" I shrugged. "You wanted an open marriage. I'm just making sure it's fair." Carol scoffed. "You don't actually want this." Sharon, ever composed, leaned into me slightly, resting a delicate hand on my knee. "And how would you know what he wants?" she asked smoothly. Carol's jaw twitched. She didn't like that, not one bit. "Good." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "See, Carol, here's the difference between us," I said calmly. "You wanted an open marriage because you thought it meant getting everything, having a committed husband at home while sneaking around with Kenneth like some reckless teenager." Carol rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, spare me the lecture." I ignored her. "But me?" I continued. "I'm actually embracing this new lifestyle you suggested." Carol's expression darkened. "Stephen." Sharon tilted her head, feigning curiosity. "You don't look happy, Carol. I thought this was what you wanted." Carol inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. "You're so pathetic," she spat. "You think bringing her into this will make me jealous? That I'll come crawling back, begging you to forget everything? You're a joke." I smiled. That's funny, because the only one losing here is you. She frowned, hesitation flickering in her eyes. That was it. The moment she realized she had overplayed her hand. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward her. Carol's face dropped. Her own text messages. Screenshots I had forwarded to myself. Late-night conversations with Kenneth. Her insults. Her lies. Her betrayal. And worst of all, the message I had sent to Kenneth before she could get to him first. Me. Hey Kenneth, just a heads up. Carol told me everything. Good luck explaining this to Sharon. Carol lunged for my phone, but I stepped back, slipping it into my pocket before she could snatch it. You piece of... I cut her off with a smirk. This is what honesty looks like, Carol. You should try it sometime. She spun toward Sharon, desperation creeping into her voice. You believe this? You're really going to trust him? Sharon, completely unfazed, rose to her feet beside me. I don't need to trust him, she said coolly. I trust the evidence. Carol was freaking out. I could see it. The panic, the realization, the sheer terror as everything slipped through her fingers. She had wanted an open marriage. Now she was about to have an open life. Because I wasn't just walking away. I was taking everything with me. Carol stood frozen, her mind scrambling for an escape. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. She wasn't the smartest person in the room. She wasn't winning. I let the silence stretch, let her feel it. Let her understand, down to her very core, that she had already lost. Then, like all manipulators do when the walls start closing in, she tried to flip the script. You're just so desperate to hurt me, she said, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You don't love Sharon. You don't want an open marriage. You're just trying to get revenge. I raised an eyebrow. Carol's mouth opened as if to say more, but no words came out. She hadn't expected me to own it. You're right, I said, stepping closer. I don't love Sharon. I barely know her. I paused, letting the words settle before delivering the final blow. But that didn't stop you with Kenneth, did it? Her face twitched. I wasn't letting her twist the narrative. And revenge? I let out a short, humorless laugh. You bet your ass this is revenge. Because you didn't just cheat, Carol. You humiliated me. You mocked me. And worst of all, you let our daughter walk in on it, like it was nothing. Carol's eyes flickered, just for a second, at the mention of Emily. Good. She should feel sick. She crossed her arms, trying to regain control. So what? You want a divorce now? Is that it? I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. Carol. I toothed. You still don't get it, do you? I turned to Sharon. Did Kenneth respond yet? Sharon, as composed as ever, glanced at her phone. A small, satisfied smile curled on her lips. Oh, he responded all right. Carol's shoulders tensed. I motioned for Sharon to read it aloud. She cleared her throat, then spoke in a perfect imitation of Kenneth's voice. Carol, what the hell did you do? Sharon knows. She's taking the kids to her mother's. She says she wants a divorce. Thanks for ruining my life. Carol flinched. I had to stop myself from smiling. Sharon turned to her. Looks like you're losing both men tonight. For the first time, real fear crossed Carol's face. This wasn't just about losing control over me. She had lost Kenneth too. This wasn't just a bad night. This was a catastrophe. I leaned in, lowering my voice. You wanted an open marriage, Carol? I murmured. Congratulations. Now you're open to deal with the fallout. Carol's hands clenched into fists. You think this is funny? I tilted my head. No, Carol. I let the weight of my next words sink in. I think it's justice. Her breathing turned ragged. And then, the front door burst open. We all turned. Standing there, face thunderous, was Kenneth. This night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Kenneth stormed into the house like a man on the edge. His face was twisted with rage, his shirt wrinkled, his hair a mess, like he had just been through hell. Good. Carol spun around, her face lighting up for a split second, until she saw the way he was looking at her. Not with love, not with desire, with pure, undiluted hatred. You idiot. Kenneth spat, his voice low and shaking. Do you have any idea what you've done? Carol flinched. Kenneth, She took the kids. Carol, he snapped. Sharon took everything. She called my boss, Carol. She told him everything. He took a step closer, eyes burning with fury. Do you even know what that means? Carol's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I glanced at Sharon. She gave me the tiniest nod. That was her doing. She hadn't just left Kenneth. She burned his world to the ground on her way out. Beautiful. Kenneth ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Jesus Christ. I lost my wife. I lost my family. And for what? A woman who can't even keep her life straight? Carol's eyes widened. Wait, what are you? Kenneth turned to me, his gaze sharp. You know she was seeing someone else, right? The air in the room shifted. Carol froze. And just like that, the night took another sharp, violent turn. I blinked, my mind catching up. Come again? Kenneth let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Oh, you didn't know? Well, that's rich. All this time, I thought she was only screwing me behind your back. He scoffed. Turns out, she was playing both of us. Sharon let out a sharp, amused breath. Well. I turned to Carol, slow and deliberate. That true, Carol? Her breathing turned shallow. I don't know what he's talking about. Kenneth barked a laugh. Holy crap. Don't even try it. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned the screen to me. A picture. Carol, sitting in a dimly lit restaurant. With another man. Not Kenneth. Not me. Someone else entirely. My stomach dropped. My hands clenched at my sides. Who the hell is that? Kenneth's voice was pure ice. That's her boss. Sharon whistled. Wow. Ambitious, aren't we, Carol? Carol's hands trembled. She was completely exposed. No more lies to hide behind. Stephen, listen. Shut up. Carol's mouth snapped shut. I took a slow step forward, my voice dangerously calm. So let me get this straight. You weren't just screwing Kenneth. You were screwing your boss too? Carol swallowed hard. It wasn't. Kenneth cut her off. And you, he said, jabbing a finger in my direction. We're sitting here feeling bad for her. Thinking this was just about me? Carol's face twisted in desperation. Stephen, baby, don't. I snapped. You don't get to baby me, Carol. Not anymore. She looked between me and Kenneth, realization dawning. She was completely, utterly screwed. No control. No power. No way out. And I was about to make sure she lost everything. Carol's whole body trembled, her eyes darting between me and Kenneth like a trapped animal. But there was nowhere left to run. No more lies to hide behind. She had backed herself into a corner. And now, I was going to bury her. I turned to Kenneth, my voice deadly calm. So, just to be clear, you and Carol have been sneaking around for months? Kenneth exhaled sharply, nodding. Yeah, and while she was screwing you, she was also screwing her boss. Kenneth let out a bitter laugh. Apparently, Carol finally snapped. You're both being ridiculous. She shrieked, her voice cracking. It wasn't even that serious. It wasn't. I cut her off. How long, Carol? She hesitated. I took a slow, menacing step forward. How long? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Kenneth's jaw tightened. Tell him, Carol. She let out a shaky breath. A year. Everything inside me went still. A year. Not weeks. Not months. A full, damn, year. I felt the rage settle deep in my bones. Not the hot, blinding kind. No, this was something colder. Sharper. Something that made me dangerous. Beside me, Sharon let out a sharp, amused breath. Wow. You really thought you'd get away with all this, huh? Carol's breathing turned ragged. I never meant for it to. To what, Carol? I cut in, stepping closer. To come out? To blow up in your face? To finally have some actual consequences? Carol clenched her jaw. I was going to tell you. I laughed. A cruel, hollow sound. Oh, were you? Her eyes darted to Kenneth, pleading. Tell them, Kenneth. It wasn't just me. You wanted this too. Kenneth scoffed. Oh, now you want to drag me down with you? He shook his head. I already lost everything tonight. My wife, my kids, my career. But you? You still think you can talk your way out of this? Carol's panic deepened. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I thought you'd understand. I felt my lip curl. Understand what, Carol? That you didn't just betray me. You disrespected our home? That you weren't just a liar, but a full-blown narcissist? That you threw away our marriage for some cheap thrills? Carol's face twisted in frustration. I deserved more than what you gave me. Silence. Pure, deadly silence. Sharon let out a low whistle. Wow. There it is. Carol clapped a hand over her mouth, realizing she had just said the quiet part out loud. I nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. Well, Carol, I said, voice steady, I hope those extra men were worth it, because you just lost everything. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and, without hesitation, sent a single message to my lawyer. File the papers. Carol's breath hitched. Stephen, no, wait, please. I ignored her. Sharon, I said, turning. Shall we? She smiled. Gladly. Kenneth scoffed. I'm out of here. You two have fun watching her crumble. Carol lunged for my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Stephen, please. We can fix this. I yanked my arm free. There's nothing left to fix, Carol. And with that, I turned, walked out the door, and left her standing in the ruins of her own disaster. Her voice cracked behind me, desperate, panicked. Stephen, please don't do this. I didn't turn around. I didn't slow down. I walked straight to my car, Sharon right beside me, while Carol stood in the doorway of our home, my home, watching her entire world collapse around her. Kenneth was already pulling out of the driveway, his tires screeching against the pavement, probably off to drown himself in whiskey and regret. He had lost his wife, his family, his career, Carol had made sure of that. And now, she was alone. Sharon stopped beside my car, exhaling sharply. Well, she said, shaking her head. That was satisfying. I let out a breathless chuckle, my heart still pounding. You think she'll ever recover from that? Sharon smirked. Not a chance. I glanced back at the house one last time. Carol was still standing there, frozen, arms wrapped around herself, like she could somehow shield herself from the consequences of her own actions. For just a second, one fleeting second, I thought about the good times. 11 years together. The nights we laughed until we couldn't breathe. The mornings when she'd pull me back into bed, whispering that she never wanted to let go. But that woman? She didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. Carol took a shaky step forward. Stephen. I rolled down the window and looked at her. Really looked at her. Then, I spoke the last words I would ever say to my wife. You wanted an open marriage? I smiled. Now you have nothing. And with that, I drove away. Carol didn't follow. She didn't scream. She just stood there, alone, as the weight of her own destruction crashed down around her. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.